"You're still thinking like an employee while I'm trying to build a luxury future," she said during a rooftop dinner while praising her CEO in front of friends. I quietly paid the bill and left forever. 11 months later, she walked into a networking conference and froze after seeing my startup's logo behind the main stage speaker panel. "You're still thinking like an employee while I'm trying to build a luxury future." She said it loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. Not whispered, not pulled aside quietly. Loud, deliberate, with that particular kind of confidence that only comes when someone has already decided they don't care about the consequences of what they're saying. The rooftop was beautiful that night. One of those Upper East Side spots where the skyline frames everything like a movie set, warm amber lights, the kind of music that costs money just to be in the room with, bottles of wine that nobody at the table actually needed, but everyone felt obligated to order. Valerie had chosen the restaurant. She always chose the restaurant. There were 6 of us at the table. Her 2 friends, Mara and Justine, both stopped mid-conversation. Shane, who I'd known for years, glanced at me and then quickly looked away. The way people do when they witness something uncomfortable and don't want to be held responsible for their reaction. And then there was Derek Holloway, her ex, who, for reasons I still haven't fully understood, had been invited to this dinner without any warning to me. Valerie had mentioned casually, maybe 20 minutes before we arrived, that Derek might stop by because he was in the neighborhood. He'd arrived before us, already seated, already ordering. He was 38, ran some kind of boutique investment firm, wore a watch that cost more than most people's cars. He had the kind of face that belonged in a magazine, not because he was remarkable, but because he'd clearly spent a significant amount of money making sure he looked like he was. He smiled when Valerie said it. Not at her, at me. I didn't respond immediately. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip, set it down carefully. "I hear you," I said. That was all. Mara laughed first. One of those short, breathy laughs that people try to disguise as something else. Justine looked at her phone. Shane still hadn't looked up. Derek leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who has never once doubted whether he belonged in a room. "That's the thing," he said, like I'd asked his opinion. "Most people spend their whole careers optimizing for stability. Security. It's a trap, honestly. Comfortable trap, but still a trap." Valerie nodded. Enthusiastically. The way she only nodded when someone said exactly what she'd been wanting someone to say. "Derek gets it," she said. Then, glancing at me, "That's what I'm trying to explain to you. It's not just about money. It's about vision. About building something real." I remember looking at her across that table. The candlelight. Her dress. The way she held her wine glass. Always by the stem. Always practiced. She was beautiful. That had never been the issue. And I remember thinking, very quietly, in a place deep enough that no one at the table could see it, "She has no idea what I've already been building." I should have left right there. I just didn't realize that dinner would become the last night of our relationship. Here's what nobody at that table knew. For the previous 9 months, I had been waking up at 4:47 a.m. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. Not because of an alarm. Because once your brain gets locked onto something real, something you've built from zero, something with actual momentum, it stops letting you sleep past a certain point. It just opens your eyes and says, "There's work to do." My laptop was always open on my desk before sunrise, before the city woke up, before Valerie's alarm went off in the next room. I'd sit there in the dark, in that particular silence that belongs only to the very early morning, and I'd work. I'd been building something. Had been for almost 2 years, actually. Longer than Valerie and I had been together. But she didn't know the full picture. Not yet. I told her I had a side project. She'd heard that phrase, side project, and categorized it somewhere next to hobby and phase and things men say when they don't want to admit they're going nowhere. She never asked follow-up questions. I never pushed her to ask. At the time, I told myself that was patience, that I was protecting something fragile while it grew strong enough to survive scrutiny. Looking back now, that was my first mistake. The second mistake was staying at that dinner table for another 2 hours. Valerie and I had been together for 14 months. We met at a networking event in Midtown, the kind where everybody's business card is slightly more impressive than their actual job. She was working in brand consulting at the time, which mostly meant she helped luxury companies find ways to talk about themselves. She was good at it. Sharp instincts for image, for perception, for the gap between what something is and what people believe it to be. That quality attracted me to her. I thought it meant she understood nuance. It took me a while to realize it also meant she was constantly applying the same lens to me. She lived in a one-bedroom in the West Village that was about 40% larger than what her salary could reasonably support. She had a line for it. You have to invest in the environment that reflects who you're becoming. Her Instagram was curated within an inch of its life. Every photo a considered statement. Every caption a small declaration. I had a 2-bedroom in Brooklyn that I shared with a roommate I barely saw. I drove a 5-year-old car that ran perfectly and looked fine, and that she had once described as humble, not as a compliment. I worked a corporate product management job. Good salary. Solid company. The kind of role that looks respectable on paper and invisible at dinner parties. What I did not tell people, what I barely told Valerie, was that the corporate job was the engine, not the destination. It was funding the thing I actually cared about. Every paycheck, every quarterly bonus, every saved expense, going into building what I was building. She mistook my calmness for comfort. She mistook my silence for contentment. Those two misreads would cost her more than she understood that night on the rooftop. The dinner with Derek set something in motion. Not immediately. Slowly. The way water damage works. Invisible for a long time. Then suddenly structural. The comments had been building for months before that night, but I'd been filing them away as friction, as stress, as the normal pressure that comes when two people want different things at different speeds. Derek just closed a Series B for one of his portfolio companies. Mara's boyfriend just leased a place in Tribeca. They're talking about buying something in the Hamptons eventually. Said while scrolling her phone in bed. Also casual. I just feel like we're not moving. Like everyone around us is building, and we're just existing. That one was less casual. That one came on a Sunday morning in late October, while I was making coffee, and she was sitting at the kitchen counter looking at something on her laptop that I didn't ask about. I handed her a cup. We're moving, I said. Where? She asked. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have an answer. Because the answer wasn't ready to be spoken yet. She took that silence as confirmation of her suspicion. It wasn't. I think about the networking events most. Valerie loved them. Collected them, almost. Any gathering where ambition and appearance intersected. She was there, dressed for it. Working the room with a precision that was genuinely impressive to watch. I went because she wanted me there. Also because, honestly, those rooms were useful. You never knew who you were going to stand next to at a cash bar in a converted Soho gallery space. But the dynamic was always the same. She'd introduce me to people, and there'd be a brief flicker. Who is this? And then I'd mention the corporate job, and I could watch the interest level recalibrate in real time. Not dramatically, just a subtle downshift. The conversation would pivot back to her, or to whoever was standing nearby with a flashier answer to "So what do you do?" I didn't take it personally. That's the thing about being genuinely focused on something. The social performance of ambition stops matching. You stop needing the room to validate you because you already know what's happening behind closed doors at 4:47 a.m. on your laptop while the city sleeps. But Valerie watched those recalibrations. Filed them. Used them later. You have to learn how to sell yourself, she told me once, in the cab ride home from one of those events. Derek walks into a room and you feel it. You feel that he's someone. You have to project that. I'm not Derek, I said. She looked out the window. No, she agreed. You're not. I laughed it off in front of everyone. But something about the way she said it felt permanent. There was one night, early November, maybe 6 weeks before the rooftop dinner, that I almost told her everything. We were at her place. She was getting ready for some event I'd already forgotten the name of. I was sitting on the edge of her bed, jacket on, watching her move through the room with that efficient pre-event energy she always had. And I almost said, I need to tell you what's actually happening. I need to tell you about the product, about the pilot clients, about the meeting I have next week with someone who, if it goes the way I think it's going to go, will change everything. I opened my mouth. She turned from the mirror. Does this look too much? I looked at her. The dress. The earrings. No, I said. You look great. She turned back to the mirror. And the moment passed. Looking back now, that was the beginning of the end. Not the rooftop dinner. That quiet, unclosed moment in her bedroom, where I swallowed the truth and handed her a compliment instead. The rooftop dinner was on a Friday in December. The week before, my startup, which I had officially named ArcLight, which nobody in Valerie's world had any reason to know yet, had completed its first legitimate pilot with a mid-sized B2B client. Not a trial, not a conversation, an actual signed engagement with actual deliverables and actual money attached. The week of that dinner, I'd had a call with an early-stage venture firm, one of the analysts, technically, not a partner, but the conversation had gone long, longer than scheduled. They'd asked to see the deck again, asked specific questions about unit economics. I knew what that meant. I also knew I wasn't going to bring any of it up at dinner, partly because it wasn't confirmed yet, partly because I was beginning to understand, in a way I hadn't fully admitted to myself, that Valerie wasn't going to be there when it was. We arrived at the restaurant at 7:15. Derek was already there. I noticed the way she smiled when she saw him. Different smile than the one she gave me. Not romantic, exactly. Something more like relief. Like his presence confirmed something she needed confirmed. The dinner moved through its stages. Wine, appetizers, conversation about real estate, about some gallery opening, about a friend of Derek's who'd just done a round of fundraising for something in the fintech space. Derek had opinions about everything, expressed them with the smooth certainty of a man who has never once been told he was wrong in a social setting. He talked about markets, about trends, about the mentality gap between people who build wealth and people who earn salaries. I listened mostly. I asked a few questions. Good questions, actually. The kind that reveal you understand the subject. Derek glanced at me once or twice with a slight recalibration. Maybe this guy knows something. But Valerie redirected the conversation before anything could develop from it. Then, somewhere between the entrees and the moment Mara started talking about a resort in the Maldives, Valerie looked across the table at me. You're still thinking like an employee while I'm trying to build a luxury future. The words sat in the air. Shane went very still. Mara and Justine did the social shuffle, eyes moving, recalibrating, waiting. Derek smiled at his wine glass. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip, looked at her calmly. I hear you, I said. And then I did something I'd been practicing without knowing I was practicing it. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain ArcLight. I didn't mention the pilot client or the venture firm call or the 4:47 a.m. mornings or any of it. I just sat with it, quietly, the way a man who knows exactly where he's going can't afford to sit with being misunderstood, because the misunderstanding is temporary and the destination is not. But something shifted in me that night. Quietly, irreversibly. She didn't know she'd already lost me. She thought she was shaking something loose. She was actually letting go. The dinner wound down around 10 p.m. Derek made a comment as we were all getting up, something about a car service he'd ordered, something about a late gathering at someone's penthouse, delivered in that practiced offhand way that made it clear the invitation was conditional on an audience. Valerie looked at me with that specific expression I'd learned to read. This is where you say yes. I'm going to head out, I said. Early morning. The micro-expression on her face. That flash of embarrassment and frustration compressed into less than a second. Really, she said. Tone managed, but present. Yeah. I smiled. Enjoy the rest of the night. I walked to the host stand. Asked for the bill. Paid it. The full table, $1,200, without mentioning it to anyone. Tipped generously. Put on my coat. Walked to the elevator. Wrote it down alone. Stepped out onto the street. And that was the last night of our relationship. I just didn't tell her that yet. I didn't blow it up dramatically. Didn't show up with a speech. Didn't send a long message cataloging everything that had gone wrong. Didn't make her feel it in some theatrical way. She called the next morning at 11. I picked up. Hey, she said, like nothing had happened. Hey. A pause. You left kind of early last night. I did. Another pause. She was waiting for me to fill it with something. An apology. An explanation. A bid for reconnection. I let it stay empty. Are you upset? She asked. No, I said. And I meant it. I wasn't upset. I was something quieter than upset. Something more settled. Because I feel like you've been distant lately. Like you're not really invested in. Valerie. She stopped. I think we both know this isn't working. The silence that followed that sentence was different from the other silences. It had weight. I don't think that's fair, she said. Her voice shifted registers. You've been checked out for months. I've been trying to have real conversations with you about where we're going, and you just... I know, I said. Not agreeing with her version. Just acknowledging that she had won. I'm not angry, I told her. I genuinely wish you well. I think you should have exactly what you're looking for. I just don't think I'm the one who's going to give it to you. Another silence. So that's it, she said. Yeah, I said. I think that's it. She said something else. I don't remember exactly what. Something about us needing to have a proper conversation, about this not being how adults handle things, about how I was proving her point by walking away without a fight. I listened, let her finish. Then I said, "Take care of yourself." And I ended the call. I sat in my apartment for a few minutes. My roommate wasn't home. The building was quiet. Outside, Brooklyn was doing what Brooklyn does on a Saturday morning, slow, gray, indifferent. I opened my laptop, pulled up the ArcLight deck, and got to work. The next 11 months were the loneliest and most important of my life. Those two things are not unrelated. I've read things, interviews with founders, memoirs, the retrospective essays that people write once they've already made it, where they describe the building phase with a kind of romance. The grind, the hustle, the beautiful suffering of creating something from nothing. What nobody tells you is how genuinely quiet it is. You stop going to the dinners, not because you're boycotting anything, because the energy required to sit in a room performing a version of yourself that has nothing to do with where you're actually going is energy you cannot afford. You start declining things and people stop inviting you, and that's fine. That's correct. The radius of your life gets smaller, and inside that smaller radius, things start moving very fast. I was at the office until 7, home by 7:45 after the train. Food, whatever took least time to prepare. And then the desk, the laptop, the work, until midnight or 1 or sometimes 2. Shane would check in occasionally. "You still alive?" I'd send back something brief. "Yeah, working." He stopped asking what I was working on after a while. That was fine too. January, the venture firm call that had gone long came back around. Not the analyst, the partner. We met at a coffee shop in the Flatiron district. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s, but with a directness that I recognized. The particular efficiency of someone who has learned to identify what matters and ignore everything else. He'd read the deck 3 times. He had notes. For 90 minutes we talked about the product, the market, the unit economics, the go-to-market strategy. He pushed hard on a few things. I pushed back where I had grounds to. He seemed to like that. At the end, he said, "I want to bring this to the full partnership." I kept my face calm. Inside, something shifted, a tectonic thing, deep and quiet. "When?" I asked. 2 weeks, he said. I shook his hand, walked out of the coffee shop, stood on the sidewalk in the January cold for about 30 seconds. Then I went home and spent 5 hours preparing for a meeting I hadn't been officially invited to yet. February, I quit the corporate job. It felt like stepping off a ledge. It also felt like the only honest thing I'd done in years. My manager, a decent guy named Elliot who'd always seen more in me than most people bothered to look for, asked if there was anything he could do to keep me. Counteroffers. Title adjustments. "I appreciate it," I told him. "This is just the right time." He nodded slowly. "What are you building?" I told him, briefly, the core of it. He was quiet for a second. "Send me the deck when you're ready for outside eyes." He became our second angel investor 4 months later. That's the thing about quiet relationships built over time. They compound in ways that loud ones never do. March and April were hard. The partnership meeting had gone well enough. Term sheet was on the table. But term sheets are the beginning of a new kind of stress, not the end of the old kind. Legal review, negotiations, cap table decisions. All the things they don't teach you until you're in the middle of them at midnight with a cold cup of coffee and a contract document that has comments in 17 places. I had good advisors, fortunately. Randall, who I'd met at one of those networking events that Valerie used to drag me to, ironically, had been through 2 exits. He knew the patterns. He'd seen the traps. He sat with me through some of those midnight sessions and never once made me feel like I was in over my head, even when I was. "The investors aren't buying your product," he told me once. "They're buying your judgment. They're betting you'll make the right calls when everything gets confusing. So make sure you always know why you're deciding what you're deciding." I wrote that down. I still have it. May. ArcLight closed its seed round. I don't need to give you the number. What I'll tell you is that it was enough. Enough to build the team we needed. Enough to execute the roadmap properly. Enough to stop worrying about whether the company would exist in 60 days and start worrying about whether it would matter in 60 months. I hired 3 people in May. For more by July. The office was a single room in a shared workspace in the meatpacking district. Not glamorous. Good light, though. That mattered more than the glamour. We worked hard. The team was young mostly. Hungry in the right way. Not desperate, but committed. The kind of committed where people stay late because they want to, because the work is actually interesting, because they feel the momentum and want to be part of it. I'd come in early and leave late. Not to perform work ethic, just because there was always more to do and I wanted to be there for it. There was one night in late June. The team had left, the shared workspace was quiet, the city outside the window doing its summer Friday thing, and I was sitting at my desk reviewing something, and I had this particular feeling that I hadn't had in years. Stillness. Not the stillness of emptiness. The stillness of being exactly where you're supposed to be. I thought about the rooftop dinner. About that table. About the way Derek had smiled at his wine glass. I didn't feel angry. I felt something more complicated. A kind of gratitude, almost. Because that dinner had been the friction that finally forced the exit. And the exit had forced everything else. She thought she was waking me up. She was actually setting me free. I should tell you what ArcLight actually did, because it matters for the rest of this. We built a platform for mid-market B2B companies to manage and optimize their client success operations. Basically a layer that sat between their CRM and their customer communications, using smart automation to improve retention metrics at scale. Unsexy description. Real problem. Real market. The pilot clients from December had renewed. 2 more had come in through referrals. The product was working. Not perfectly. Nothing ever works perfectly, but well enough that clients were feeling it in their numbers. By August, we had a case study we were proud of. 43% improvement in client retention for a manufacturing services company that had been churning accounts like it was a hobby. That case study opened doors that had been politely closed before. By September, we were in conversations with 3 enterprise prospects. Not pilot conversations. Procurement conversations. By October, we'd signed one of them. The numbers were moving. The team was growing. ArcLight was real. Not just in the sense of existing. Lots of things exist, but in the sense of matching. Being the kind of company that people in the space were starting to know about. Starting to pay attention to. I was starting to get speaking invitations. I declined most of them. The timing wasn't right. Then, in early November, I got an invitation that I didn't decline. TechFront NYC. Annual conference. Full-day event at a hotel in Midtown. 300 attendees, maybe more. Mix of founders, investors, corporate innovation types, and the ecosystem of people who orbit that world. Consultants, media, the perpetually networking. They wanted me on the founder panel. Main stage. Afternoon session. I said yes. My name would be on the program. My company's logo would be on the stage backdrop. I didn't think much about who else might be in the room. That was not an oversight. That was the only version of this I was ever interested in. The morning of TechFront, I was up at 5. Not because of nerves. I don't sleep well before things anymore. Not because I'm anxious, but because my brain won't stop running scenarios. I've accepted it. I work with it. I went over my talking points. Not a script. I don't do scripts. More like a map of the territory I wanted to cover in the order that made most sense. The founding story. The problem we'd identified. The decision to leave corporate. The seed round. The enterprise client. Where we were going next. I showered. Put on a suit. Charcoal, no tie. The kind of choice that communicates I take this seriously, but I'm not performing formality. I checked in with Randall before I left. He sent a short message. Go be impossible to ignore. I laughed. Took the subway. Walked the 4 blocks from the station to the hotel. Registered at the desk. Got my speaker badge. Found the green room. There were 4 of us on the panel. I knew 2 by reputation. The 3rd I'd met briefly at a different event. We ran through logistics with the moderator, format, timing, how we'd handle Q&A. Standard. What wasn't standard was the size of the logo behind the stage. I'd seen it in the promotional materials, obviously, but seeing it in person, ArcLight, white letters on a dark backdrop, clean and stark and permanent looking, was different. Different in a way I didn't have a word for yet. I stood at the edge of the stage for a moment before the session started, looking out at the room filling up. 300 seats. Mostly full. The particular energy of a crowd that is genuinely there for ideas, not just the catering. I thought about a lot of things in that moment. I let them pass through. I found my seat on the panel. She walked in at 2:17 p.m. The afternoon session had just started. I was answering the moderator's first question, something about the decision to go deep on one vertical before expanding, and I was focused, present, in the room in the way you have to be when you're speaking to 300 people. But I noticed her. I don't know why I noticed her specifically. The room was full. People were moving, finding seats, settling in. But there was a disturbance at the back, not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle pause in the movement near the rear doors, and something in my peripheral vision registered it. I kept answering the question. I didn't look directly. I didn't need to. Valerie had come with Justine. That's what I was told afterward, by someone I knew who'd been seated near the back. Justine had gotten them into the event, some connection through a client, apparently. They'd arrived late, which was consistent with a certain kind of confidence. The assumption that you can arrive at anything after it started and still slip in unnoticed. They were walking toward the open seats, toward the right side of the room. Justine, apparently, was talking. Valerie stopped walking. Just stopped. Mid-step. In the aisle. Like something had shorted. She was looking at the stage backdrop. At the logo. At the name. At me. I was mid-sentence when I finally made direct eye contact with her. I didn't plan it that way. The moderator had asked to follow up. Something about the transition from corporate to founder. And I was scanning the room the way speakers do, distributing attention, and my eyes moved to the back right, and there she was. Standing completely still in the aisle. Looking at me. The expression on her face is something I've gone over many times since. Not with satisfaction, exactly. More with a kind of recognition. The recognition of someone seeing a moment arrive that you knew was coming long before they did. Confusion first. Then the specific kind of disbelief that happens when your brain refuses to accept a data point that contradicts everything it built its models on. Then recognition. Then something harder to name. Something that started behind the eyes and moved down. A collapse of something internal, quiet, and irreversible. I held eye contact for 1 second. Maybe 2. Then I looked back at the moderator and finished my sentence. The panel ran 90 minutes. Q&A was strong. Good questions from the floor. Real questions, the kind that come from people who actually understood what we were building and wanted to push on it. I answered directly. No hedging. No overclaiming. Afterward, the moderator rapped. The room applauded. I stepped off the stage and was immediately met by 2 people I'd been hoping to connect with. One from a corporate innovation group. One from a fund I'd been tracking. We talked for a while. Then other people. More introductions, more conversations, names exchanged, handshakes, the particular fluid movement of a room where everyone wants a moment with the right person. I was aware at the edge of all of it, of where she was. She'd taken a seat eventually. Watched the full panel. I could feel it without looking. Afterward, she didn't leave immediately. I knew she wouldn't. It took about 20 minutes. I was wrapping up a conversation with the corporate innovation director when I saw Valerie and Justine moving through the crowd in my direction. Justine was slightly ahead, which I recognized as the social mechanic it was. Justine providing forward momentum that Valerie could use. I shook hands with the director. Exchanged cards. Turned. We were about 8 feet apart when she stopped again. This time it wasn't surprise stopping her. It was something else. Calculation, maybe. Or the moment before a sentence when you've rehearsed it so many times it doesn't feel real anymore. Hi, she said. Hey, I said. Justine did a small wave. I nodded. A beat. That was... Valerie started. Stopped. Started again. The panel was really impressive. I had no idea you were speaking here. Last minute thing, I said, which wasn't true, but was the right thing to say. She looked at me the way you look at something that has changed shape since you last saw it. The same face, same eyes, same person, but the context has shifted so dramatically that the image needs to be rebuilt from scratch. Arclight, she said, like she was testing the word. That's your company. It is. I've actually heard of it, she said. Something complicated in her voice. Someone mentioned it at a client meeting a few weeks ago. I didn't connect it. I nodded. Justine was looking at something on the other side of the room. You've been building this the whole time, Valerie said. It wasn't quite a question. Yeah, I said simply. She seemed to want me to say more. I didn't. The silence that opened between us was different from the ones I remembered. Before, silence between us was charged with things unsaid, things avoided, things that could tip in multiple directions. This silence was clean. There was only one direction it was going to go. I'm happy for you, she said. She said it carefully. The way you say something when you're aware of how much it might cost you to mean it. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. Another beat. She smiled a little. The kind of smile that is also the beginning of something harder. I should let you, she gestured vaguely. The room. The people. The world that had arrived around me while she wasn't watching. Take care of yourself, Valerie, I said. Simple. Warm, even. No edge. No point to make. Because the point had already been made. Not by me. Not as a choice. By time. By work. By the particular slow accumulation of mornings at 4:47 a.m. when nobody was watching and nothing was certain, and I just kept going anyway. She nodded. She turned. She walked back into the crowd. I've thought about what that night on the rooftop was really about. Not the insult. Not the embarrassment. Those things are small. They evaporate. What it was really about was a belief, her belief, and honestly at moments my own. That value is visible. That if you're building something real, it should be legible, readable, impressive in real time, in the room, right now. What she never understood, what took me a long time to fully trust myself, is that real things are invisible for a long time before they're not. The 4:47 a.m. mornings were invisible. The discipline was invisible. The choices, the quiet, boring, consistent choices to keep going when nothing was confirmed and nothing was guaranteed, those were invisible too. Until they weren't. Until they were behind the main stage at TechFront, in letters tall enough to read from the back of the room. She wanted a luxury future. She spent years looking for it in the right watch, the right restaurants, the right man with the right title. She just never imagined someone would build one quietly in the dark, while she was looking somewhere else. That night, after the conference, I walked back to the office. The team had mostly gone home by then. Quiet building. Good light. I sat at my desk for a while without turning on the lamp. The city was doing its thing outside the window. I thought about Derek Holloway, wherever he was. The watch. The wine. The smile at his glass. I thought about Valerie. I thought about all of it for about 60 seconds. Then I opened my laptop. There was still work to do. There always is. By the time she finally saw what I'd been building, she was no longer part of the foundation.